We'll go live in 5, 4.
Hello, welcome to this 5th seminar in our series of events to celebrate the Jubilee Year of Systems Thinking in Practice, or STiP. Our education and scholarship at the Open University, or the OU as we call it, has pioneered systems education globally. In a moment, we're going to be joined by Porter, who at the moment is dealing with one of his children who decided they wanted to have something to say just at this moment when we were starting this call. So he'll be with us in a minute. My name's Ray Eisen, and I'm Professor of Systems here at the Open University. I speak to you today from the land of the Wurundjeri School of Nature, where Melbourne is now located. So Tyson and I are actually both in Melbourne. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge them as custodians of this land and pay my respect to their elders past and present. So today, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tyson Yunkaporta of the Appalachia Clan from Western Cape York in North Queensland. He is also a senior lecturer in Indigenous knowledges at Deakin University and director of the relatively new Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab. His work involves applying an Indigenous complexity lens to the hidden and not so hidden drivers of global systemic crises and seeking regenerative solutions. He develops and explains his work in his 2019 book, Sand Talk: How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. His book is replete with aphorisms relevant to our current human circumstances. Some include references to holistic thinking, which he says demands examining things from many points of view, especially those that are opposed to your own. He also says holism as a term overused and misunderstood as sustainability, and that you have to work at holistic reasoning. Grow it from a lived cultural framework embedded in the landscape and the patterns of creation follow you there. Tyson also invites us to consider the implications of being observers who do not try to be objective, but are integrated with a sentient system that is observing itself. In our world, nothing can be known or even exist unless it is in relation to other things, he says. His talk today is entitled On Being Systems Within Systems. It's going to be novel because he's not going to resort to PowerPoint. Before we start, a few logistics. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Natalie Foster, who will help with fielding questions and offer a vote of thanks. Please feel free to pose questions to the chat functions on your platform. These will be gathered and used in the Q&A session. A large audience have registered, so apologies in advance if we do not manage to get your question asked. The session is being recorded and will be available to view from links provided on our STiP at 50 webpage, along with previous recordings. So I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Tyson Yunkaporta to deliver his talk and to have a chat with us.
Hey, how you doing? And sorry for no PowerPoint, but I actually read the research back in the day around, I think 2007 it came out, like what happens to people's cognition when they're both delivering or viewing a PowerPoint presentation, and the relative amounts of recall that happen afterwards. It's pretty shocking. It's the least efficient and most destructive process on the planet for human memory. Not since the invention of writing itself has there been a greater destroyer of minds than the PowerPoint. Just beware the PowerPoint. Find ways to talk to people. It's fun. You remember that. From the 90s. I think that was the last time we were doing it. It was pretty good. I don't know. I seem to remember it as being a reasonably satisfying activity anyway. Having a bit of a yarn, having a cup of tea and having a bit of a yarn together. It's always good. Anyway, thank you so much, Ray, for bringing me in here. Open University. It's pretty bloody open. That's a big old front door. You're going to let this big buffy head through. That's lovely. I'm really excited to be talking to a lot of systems thinkers and complexity scientists, complexity whizzes. I bet you there's a few integral theorists in there too. There usually is. There's usually quite a few intellectual dark web adjacent people as well. You'd be around there as well, because you'd be looking into all the Santa Fe Institute stuff, and then once you're doing that, you're listening to a number of podcasts, and then the next tier of podcasts on from that is some other interesting things, and then you'll find yourself next minute you're listening to the Weinsteins on the Joe Rogan show, and I bet there's a mob of you there, because some of you are coming in through YouTube, and you'll have those beautiful algorithms, and what a lovely system that is as well. That's sort of big, weird, self-organizing system. That is these amazing, different communities that happen, but that big sort of meta organism, that paperclip monster that just trying to maximize views. That's all it was doing. That's all it was trying to do. And then all of a sudden it's managed to organize all these communities and then put them together. So you could have been, I don't know, a soccer mum that was interested in a raw vegetable diet and belly button rings, and next minute you're storming the Capitol with these guys over here. It's a beautiful thing that brings people together. That beautiful big self-organizing system that is YouTube. Love it to death. It's certainly done a lot to radicalize me towards some sort of appreciation for this beautiful cybernetic reality that we're all living in right now. Yeah, I'm very much enjoying it. When's he going to start talking about systems? Already am. In case you didn't notice, I was already talking about it. Giving a bit of an example. I'm going to get back to that one later. Particularly the vertical integration of advertising in podcasts. There's some interesting stuff going on there I've been noticing lately. Anyway, we might get to that. But just in general, really good to be talking to systems thinkers and complexity scientists. You got that discipline that you've named there and codified, and started to set in place all the protocols and laws, for this discipline, for this community, for this almost ritual complex that you're developing. It's very good. I find a lot of the metaphors that you have in there are really handy for me in translating a lot of the Indigenous knowledge systems that we do like to share with the world. Some of our more helpful processes, and metaphors from complexity theory are really good ones to use for that. I think you're really onto something there, and I reckon a couple more millennia, a few more apocalypses, because you need that apocalypse anymore, like a few times. You got to go through a few apocalypses to sort of test your theories out a bit. And once you get a few more of them under your belt, like we have, you'll have something that's approximating a pretty decent sort of a knowledge system. I'm only teasing you. It's lovely. It's awesome. Please, feel free to pop up any questions in the chat as we go along. I'm going to throw out, though, for as long as you let me speak on it here, although I would like to see this become more of a yarn as we go along, I'd like to throw out a big, horrific provocation for you. Something that'll be a bit disturbing, I think. I feel like we've gone the wrong way. When I say we, I mean pretty much all of us in the academy, in research and development, and in the sciences. I feel like for about 3 decades now, we've gone the wrong way with post-structuralism. When I say we, I mean all of us, because that's Indigenous scholars too. We really took on board the ideas from post-structuralist feminism and built those into standpoint theories and decolonizing theories. You know, we've really taken on board a lot of the postmodernism stuff, and that's handy. It's a really good data set, but it's only one data set. Now, the problem with post-structuralism is that if you're doing systems thinking, which arguably you need to be looking at systems, you need to be looking at complexity, because the problems that we're facing in the world are complex and they demand complexity science and methods of analysis in order to find our way through it. If you are doing those things, then what you're looking at in these systems, you're looking at the structures. So you're looking at the structures of, global economic system, structures of governance models, things like this, structures of financial systems. You're looking at those structures. Over the last 3 decades, we've taken our eye off that a little bit as Indigenous scholars, but I think most people have in universities, particularly people in the humanities, social sciences, people are looking at the world and modeling things in that way, but even in science as well. We've taken our eye off the structures of things and lost sight of the systems, lost sight of a holistic view of things. And this has been, part of being post-structural. We're not looking at the structures. Instead of the structures, we're looking at the discourses. Really, the only way to change a system is to change the structures within the system, the structures and the flows and the ways that all of the entities of that system organize themselves together and the emergence happens. You need to change the structure. But we stopped looking at the structure and we looked just at the information exchange. We looked just at discourse. And we had this idea that if we could change discourse, we could change the system. So, if we change the words that we use, the symbols that we use and communicate with, if we change these things, there was a kind of trippy idea that nothing exists outside of the text. So we stopped looking at the system, we stopped looking at the structure, we started just looking at the text. If we could change the text, we could change the reality. If we could change the map, we could change the territory. If we could change the word, we could change the thing. And I think, I'm not saying it's bad and I'm not saying it was a wrong choice, but I think it was a wrong direction for us just to limit ourselves to that. In limiting ourselves to that, we only ended up focusing on one data set. Because, discourse analysis does direct you towards interesting things to look at. And it is part of everything. But I think we need to be quite multidisciplinary. We need to have multiple data sets. We need to be looking at lots of different layers in the stack in the system and right across that system, all of the different data points, all of the different nodes, not just at them, but their relationships together, their relationships with each other, the way they connect, the way their interaction happens, so that exchanging information. And there's that discursive stuff, and it's important. And there is diversity there. That's a principle of complexity, but not in the way you would think. That doesn't mean it's only in that post-structuralist way is diversity all about, platforming one of the nodes, centering the voice of one particular group of nodes, centering those voices or something like this. These are symbolic things. No, actual diversity means making sure that you remain as dissimilar as possible from the other nodes around you that are very similar to you. And it also means you need to be interacting with as many dissimilar nodes as you can. There needs to be a lot of different kinds of neurons getting together and making new connections in your brain for example. You can't just be running over the same grooves forever, because you know which way those people end up voting. Hey! So yeah, that's what that. You need to have that diversity. These need to be all connecting and networking in. Now it's the relationships, between the things that define what they are. In the end, in Indigenous analysis, you don't even see the nodes anymore. You don't see the data points. You see the connections between them. And then as you step back further and further, you see the shapes and patterns that landscape, the topography of relations make. And that's how you start identifying the basins of attraction. Sorry, I just saw the term intersectionality movement. I haven't seen it referred to as that before, and it's not really a movement. But yeah, I mean, it's like I said before, there's, I guess the identity of different nodes, if you're looking for true diversity in a system, it's about nodes that actually behave differently from each other, that have different habits and that are quite actually diverse. They can't just have be a cluster of nodes with one arbitrary trait in common. And then we go, oh, well, that's all those ones. And so we'll get someone with that arbitrary trait, someone with that arbitrary trait and that arbitrary trait, and they can be the board of directors. Look at that, colours of Bennett in one. Yep, and we've got all the genders there, and we've got all the sexualities and different ability levels and everything there. And that's diversity. Only problem is those kids all went to the same college and they think exactly the same. Exactly the same, so they have no actual diversity. Like for really productive diversity, you actually need to get that cognitive diversity happening. People who think in different ways. So where am I at? Sorry, the intersectionality thing threw me a bit. Like I said, everything that's coming out of that post-structuralism is that's good data too, but it's only one data set. So I don't think there's much to argue about with it, of whether it's good or bad, or whether it should, this particular brand of it should go away, or these particular people in it are bad or good. I think that's irrelevant. It's all good data, so use the data set, but it's only one data set, so use everything else as well. I don't know, it's pretty easy. You complexitorians, you know how that works. So is the system the map or the territory? I don't know. I was thinking about it from a dog's point of view today, because you got to think a bit strangely and non-linear. I was thinking about what dogs' maps look like, and I'm pretty sure a dog's map is a scent map. I think it's maps that they can smell, and I think that it's a ratio of 1-to-1 that's mapped onto the actual landscape. So I think for dogs, the map is the territory, and you pee on it. Is that a good answer for that one? Oh, man, I hope so. I can't see anybody's reactions. I've done some of these Zoom meetings before, and I've been like, 15 minutes in and thinking I was going really well, but until I looked over in the comments section, there was a whole of all caps and exclamation points all the way through it. People were really wild, but I couldn't see their faces. Anyway, so for dogs, the map is the territory. There's a lot of really interesting arguments for and ideas that we're working through in how we work with that. It's funny, everything that I sort of find myself putting forward when I'm looking at the protocols and processes and systems of Aboriginal knowledge, I usually come to the conclusion that this is human knowledge and that everybody is sort of patterned this way, and it's kind of hardwired into us, and that if we don't go through a process of domestication, then this is just what we're like. Anyway, look, humans, our memories are our mechanisms of memory are very much rooted in our spatial relations. They're very much grounded in navigational mechanisms, in our brains. So a lot of our memory is either narrative-based or spatial, place-based. So the parts of your brain that you use for navigation are actually the best for storing long-term memory. And you know what happens to you when you hear a story. Any story you hear, that's something that's going to stick in your head forever if it's a decent story. And it goes straight to long-term memory. There's no repetition needed. That's there for good. So quite a bit of our research now coming out of the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab at Deakin, which we've founded this year. We're doing quite a bit of Indigenous memorization technique research, which is sort of leveraging those things. So it's kind of like a memory palace, except it's not an imagined place, it's a real place. And it's a real landscape, not just a map, but the maps that you have are kind of inner landscapes. So you can imagine yourself walking there, but it's better if you can actually get out there pretty regular and walk around it. So it's a place, and it's a map, and it's a story, and that's important. It's a pathway or a series of pathways, narrative pathways through that landscape, that living landscape. And that pathway has landmarks along it that are characters in the story, events in the story, that kind of thing. And the kind of information you can build into there can be very, very complex and very layered and very dynamic. So you can keep adding to it over time. You end up with this beautiful stack inside that landscape, which is different from the memory palace or method of loci technique, which is good for memorizing a deck of cards or 10 decks of cards in 30 seconds and then forgetting it forever once you've won the memory athlete competition, or once you've swatted for your exam or whatever. So we've been doing this with a lot of medical students, because they have to, and so we've been helping them memorize things like, the citric acid cycle, kick off with an easy bones in the hand, but then also it gets into cranial nerve, which is really hard to remember. So it's all this different information, but stuff that you can layer, things into the story. There are a lot of various other techniques in there. A lot of people don't know this about Indigenous dreaming stories, but they have a lot of sex and violence in them. This is also a memory mechanism for memory. The more inappropriate something is, the funnier it is. The more taboo the language is or the actions in the story are, the more likely are to remember it forever. I deploy that often. I'm not sure if it's out of, this sort of expertise in this area, or if it's out of sheer laziness, because I can't think of better ways to organize my pedagogy for you fine folks that I can't actually see on the screen. So I talk about dogs peeing on stuff, and you don't forget that in a hurry. Anyway, so somebody's saying that they were never into doing a PhD. Yeah, if they were going to change their mind, they'd want to do it at Naikiri. Well, that would mean that we'd all have to spend time being brilliant to you all the time. And it's no one's got time for that in universities anymore. My goodness, you're supposed to be a complexity thinker and be a systems thinker and look at where the university system's going right now, where degrees are going to be going, how much of this is going to change. I know some of you are waiting for when all the lockdowns will end and it'll go back to normal again, but most things aren't going back to normal. There are global economic cataclysms going on at the moment that I think most people haven't felt the shock waves completely from these yet, but that won't be going away anytime soon. The world that you're about to step out into was very different from the one you stepped into. But same with me, we all go through that. I was born in 72, for God's sake, the year after everything changed. You check out that website, WTF happened in 1971. if you look that one up.com, yeah, they just basically show all the graphs, all the trends, the terrible things like toxicity and dumping, misogyny, domestic violence, all of those, and and all the good things like club membership, stable families, pretty much all the positive indicators. Anyway, so you've got, there's a whole bunch of the bad sort of maps go. There's a big spike after 1972. You see these L curves happen, heaps of them going that way, and then all the good things are all going that way. Anyway, it was a good year to be born. You've just, I guess when you're analyzing things, you gotta make sure you keep your complexity lens on. Like, you can't just go, aha, that was when they went off the gold standard, and then start watching a whole heap of weird YouTube videos, and suddenly you find yourself taking supplements and, and then wondering where Joe Rogan's gone. He just got COVID. He's probably died, and all the big supplement companies are covering it up. He's like, his ivermectin sponsors are doing a big cover up. He's actually dead, so they're just gonna CGI him into stuff every now and then. Oh, you're really fat, man. Because you got to do that. Anyway, I don't even know where we're up to. I think I really wanted to kick off with that really big provocation that maybe perhaps post-structuralism and the discursive analysis that came out of that offers us one data set, and perhaps there's a need to start including a bit of structuralism again, via systems thinking and complexity sciences. We need to be making sure we're seeing the systems and how they work. We need to see the structure of systems, and we need to put them together. And I guess I could just tell you about the yarn that I'm just fresh from right now. I was talking to a German lady, because I wrote a little bit about Germany in the book. I wrote bad things about some of the historical stuff, but good things about some of the contemporary stuff, and yeah, just some of the structures, the resilient village structures they have in there, and things that they have in their economic system that are actually kind of making things bearable. The horrendous things that are happening in the financial system and on their, whatever they have for Wall Street, probably Wall Street. The fluctuations there don't seem to be causing too much damage on the ground, for a lot of stable families, in villages and municipalities. It's largely because of a few structural things that are really quite amazing. And one of those structural things is the fact that a family can collectively own property together. They can collectively own a business together. So no single person owns that capital. It's very anti-fragile. It makes sure there's an amazing social safety net even within families. But then families that are syndicated together in these business communities that's made of family businesses and ends up being like a village or a region that has these beautiful supply chains running through it that are really quite robust, in which the same unit of exchange, the same token is changing hands within the same system many times. So there's a really high velocity to the currency there within those communities. It's really quite beautiful. The other thing that they've got right is the most basic foundational structural thing you need, which is you need to have things right. You need to have things right at the center of your society, at the center of your economic system, which needs to be the mother and the child. Mother and child needs to be honored in that system. And so, within these communities and family businesses and everything, women are quite stable and cared for. And even if they find themselves outside of that, there's another layer, a beautiful safety net provided by the state, which basically makes sure that women have, are paid for the labor they do in raising the children, and that they are able to return, that they're supported with childcare in order to return to the workplace when they need to, etc., etc., etc. Now, it's very interesting because I've seen scientific studies, I've seen rigorous papers from the United States and Australia that prove statistically that measurably children raised by single mothers do worse on every metric. They go to prison. They're more likely to go to prison. They die 10 years earlier. All of these horrible things of children who are raised by single mothers. And I've seen that presented over and over again in Australia, and I've seen it over and over again from the UK and from the United States. However, that same paper in Germany is very different. So I don't know. This is why it's handy to look at a few different data sets, not just rely on one. Because if you're looking at just the single mother data from the United States, Texas, let's go with Texas. And that's really going to give you only one view. And that's going to be quite skewed because, confirmation bias is a thing. There is an uncertainty principle, and it is happening in the world. It is having a bit of an impact. Mix up your data sets a little bit because the German stats on single mothers are completely the opposite of everything you'll find here. It brings me back to the original point that you can't change the world by changing the text. You have to change. You can only make change through structural change. There's a couple of decent structural things going on in Germany that are really insulating communities and villages and mothers, from the worst machinations of the financial layers that are happening over there from the dastardly villains at the top. So that's really handy. That's really handy. So if you want to survive all of this, if you want to try and make some kind of change or keep some kind of a livable planet, you need to get back to structuralism a little bit and just include a few different data sets. You might also think of talking to Indigenous people who've been doing that for a while. And because there's all kinds of things we have to offer for you, different ways of thinking, but also different methods of inquiry, even just things that, we'd be happy to share for you to enrich your own method of inquiry. Like, for example, time and place. I know this sounds very basic and you'd be rolling your eyes, but we include time and place as variables in our inquiry, in Indigenous methods of inquiry, traditionally going back thousands of years. Your ancestors probably did the same thing not so long ago, probably a century ago, when most of the people on the planet were still living in a relation with the landscape. Your ancestors that recently were probably doing it. We're probably only making decisions, based on an analysis that included time and place. It's been only in the last century, with the invention of this system of nations, globally, and nation building, that people have been domesticated in a particular way, that they've lost that. And that means the sciences have lost that too. So it means that science would regard a substance that you might extract from a plant or a tree. They'll regard that substance as being universal to that species. I'll extract that sap, let's say. We'll extract that compound from there, and then we'll go and run tests on it. And then, but of course, in science, you've got to replicate the results. So that study might show, oh my God, like a really marked increase in outcomes here. So then let's replicate those results over here. Go over to those trees over there and grab some of that compound. So they run the experiment again, completely the opposite results. So they can't replicate the results. Why is that? They were using exactly the same substance. Well, they ignored the variables of time and place. They were taking it from different locations where the tree was growing. That was stony ground over there, and that was sandy ground over there. So the sap was different. They also extracted it from different parts of the tree, so that caused variation. But above all, they ignored time, because season is everything. In the right season, if you're extracting that compound from the bark, it will have these effects. If you're extracting it from the sapwood, in this particular season, it will have this particular effects. If you're extracting it from the roots, these are the things. This is how Indigenous knowledge works. And you don't have to know everything about that tree, but all you have to take away, and it's not appropriation, is that I might include the variables of time and space in my next experiment. Boom! Check it out. Everything will change. You'll find results become replicable in some circumstances. Look, we got heaps of tips like this for you, and we do want to share. And there is a bit of a zeitgeist, a bit of a critical mass of people around the globe who really are ready to come at a deeper level. They're not just interested in scoring a Indian pipe or some feathers or I don't know, some kind of stone from a sacred site that they can wear on a poxy chain around their neck or something like that. You guys aren't after these things. You want to sit down. You want to come into dialogue. You want to work together and find a way to bring everybody, back under, if not the law of the land, then at least the laws of fucking physics at some stage in the next few years, like before everything dies. So yeah, well, that's the work that we're going to be doing together and the dialogues that we'll be having. See that use of taboo language there? There you go. It's either because I'm really lazy or because I really, really want you to remember that. Do you remember what I said? Or do you just remember the F word? Anyway, I'm really happy to start jumping in on some questions now.
Okay, Tyson, I'm going to open up with a couple of questions, and I'm going to take you back to your own work in your book, Sand Talk. You have said in that book that you're inviting readers to remember their own culture, reframing what it means to be human. So I wonder what you've got to say about the current framings that we give to different, in different discourses or in different knowledge systems to what it is to be Homo sapiens. And do you have a view on what framings we should be seeking to explore and generate together in the future?
Yeah, well, I think they should be able to marry whoever they want. But Homo sapiens. All right. Yeah. So some of the framings around that. Look, the worst thing that's in our way is a wrong story. There are a lot of really big wrong stories in the world, and narratives. Yeah, they're powerful for memory, but they're also really powerful in other ways. Which I think that was the drive behind what I mentioned with that. There's nothing outside of the text. If you can change the text, you can change reality. In a way, stories really do shape reality. They aren't the reality, but they are very, very powerful. And there's some very, very powerful narratives in the world about human beings that are sort of making us feel like naughty children who don't really deserve to exist. We are like a virus. We are like zombies. We are like, horrendous things that just can't help it. We can't help ourselves. We destroy everything. I don't know. If you actually look at the data of when a lot of our activities stopped, our human activities, like our community human activities, the stuff that we do all the time, moving around all the place, commuting, doing this and that, you did see a bit of a reduction in a lot of emissions and things like this, a lot of the negative effects that humans have on the world, but only a few %. A lot of people think it was a big environmental impact, and that was sold to us as such. We've been told that us stopping being human for a while and stopping doing our community activities together for a while is somehow, cleared the air and temporarily healed the planet. And so that suggests to it, if we just stop being human, then, this Anthropocene that's caused by these anthros will go away. It's not really true. We could stop all of our showering, but it would only save 10% of the water fresh water that's being used. This is industry that is deliberately clunky, that is deliberately wasteful. Industry that is subsidized in order to be clunky and to burn lots and lots of energy that doesn't really need to be burned, and create lots of waste that doesn't really need to be waste, because within those supply chains that are all owned by like one or two dudes, there's money for that. When you own the rails, every stretch of rail and every part of that and every interaction, that kicks back to you. And the clunkier and more inefficient that is, the better. So it's not us that's doing it. It's not humans as a species. And I guess talk to anybody who's been through a disaster and stuck around afterwards, when everybody came together to help each other, feed each other, clothe, shelter each other, and work together. And then you watch them start smiling. It's always the happiest days of somebody's life, because it's when they became undomesticated for a minute. They came out from underneath the state and the marketplace, and they got to actually live in their human patterns. Human actual economies emerged. Human governance structures emerged for that community that was helping each other out. And this is our patterning. Whales, birds, they remember migration routes hardwired into them biologically when they're born. Us as humans, we remember regenerative economic systems and governance models. That's what's hardwired into us. And we will return to it as soon as we're released, the moment we're released.
Okay, I'm just going to ask one quick question before I hand over to Natalie to ask some of the more questions in the chat function.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether our audience will appreciate what sand talk is if they haven't read your book.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this is a custom of drawing images on the ground to convey knowledge, as I understand it. And in your book, you alert the reader to the constraints operating on you, the author, because you're restricted in customary relations about what you could actually convey in your drawings. And you refer to your drawings in your book as entry-level knowledge. Well,
Yeah.
that's fine, that's good. Now, what's interesting for me is that at the Open University 50 years ago, which is a blink compared to 60,000 years of Indigenous occupation of Australia, we had to teach systems thinking. And one of the tools and techniques we developed was what we call systems diagramming. So we do a lot of diagramming and drawing as a way of knowing about a situation, to understand complexity and how we're thinking about it. And so I'm just wondering whether you can reflect on the processes of diagramming, and whether in your experience it's the chatting and the diagramming together in relationship, or whether it's the diagram once you've finished that's the key element, or whether they both have places.
Oh, it is the process. Look, metaphors are the language of spirit, and the process of working with knowledge is quite sacred, especially if you're doing inquiry or doing innovation. You're basically taking tangible things from the tangible world, and then you're translating that into metaphors and taking it across into this place of spirit, this abstract space. And in that abstract space, you're moving these things around, and you're trying out different combinatorials, and you're arranging those in a certain way or a certain pattern, and finding something that you want to apply that way. Then you close that loop and bring it back across from Sky Camp to the Earth Camp again. You bring it across from that world of the abstract to the world of the tangible. You have to close that loop, that feedback loop. It's really important. You can't just sit over on that side or sit over on this side. You have to close the loop and have that application going on there. But then you're responsible for what you've brought back. Where images are tricky is that you're doing that other side work over on this side. Like you're doing it directly, You're creating tangible, concrete metaphors that are part of the reality here. So you're like creating a place of spirit in the real. So an image is a very powerful thing, and you want to be really careful about that. That's why, like, so I would call image mind. And so that's in my language how you'd say it. And mind means like, mind, it basically means like a spirit. So a person's image is like a part of their spirit. I don't know if you ever come across that old trope of, the Aborigines believe that the flash from the camera would take their spirit away. And they were just like, no, you don't take my photo, get away. You're stealing my spirit. You can't keep my image. You get my photo, I'm going to rip it up. Stop hitting me. Anyway, that's how that history went. But yeah, that image, it's important. It's a part of your spirit. And so there are a lot of protocols around doing sand talk. Like there's just play stuff that kids do. And there's teaching stuff that adults do with kids and the community does together. And it varies from place to place. In some places, only women do it. And the women in those places laugh at me for writing a book about it. And they say like, what, have you got a vagina? Hey, hey, like this, which is a bit transphobic. In a way, but those old girls live in a whole different set of
okay, over to Natalie to ask a couple of questions from the audience. Yeah, over to you, Nat.
Thanks, Ray, and hi, Tyson, and everybody watching. So I've got some other questions that we've collected from Zoom and YouTube and elsewhere. So the first one is from Kristen on YouTube, and she asks, how can we perceive in new ways when we are so embedded in the system and our own biases?
How can we perceive in new ways? It is really tricky, and I guess that comes in with something else that someone's commented on there. It's like, hang on, but did you say that words can't change? You know what I mean? You can't change the system by changing the words. Perception is important, but I guess it comes back to that age-old sort of dilemma of, that if you can experience a hallucination or an illusion, and that feels real to you in the same way that your everyday perception feels real, then shouldn't they cancel each other out? How can you how can you say that anything is real? And I guess here's how we do it in our way. It's about the aggregate of stories. So when we all sit around together, instead of everybody sitting around listening to one dude like me, we're all sharing our stories and bringing them alongside each other. So if we're all standing on the beach, then I'm standing here and I'm seeing the moon reflected on that spot there, near those rocks, on the water. But the fellow over here, he's seeing that moon reflection in a very different spot. Which one of us is right? We're both sharing different perceptions, but we got the same picture. Well, if you get everyone on that beach together and we all share our story, we might arrive at the conclusion that the moonlight is shining on every part of the ocean at once, and that you can only see part of it if you're looking in a straight line. And I guess that's how you get to it. It's funny though, there's that idea of curses that happen with words, And I guess if you're speaking a language of the land where there's less division between the abstract and the real thing, then you do have to be careful with your words because in a lot of ways, the word, like the metaphor of the word is very closely related to the spirit of it, the thing that you're describing. What we don't have a lot of in Indigenous languages, in Aboriginal languages in Australia anyway, is abstract nouns. So, we don't have words for things like economics and, relationships and, you know what I mean? Lots of different specific words for different kinds of relationships, many more than in English, but no abstract noun encompassing all relationships. So I think if you're speaking a trade Creole that is so separated from the reality by so many abstracts, I think you can pretty much say whatever you want. So I do.
So I think we've got some quite related questions here to what you've just been saying, but we've got a question from Mike, who is asking, are there any Indigenous ideas for helping cognitively diverse groups to form and to stay together when they disagree?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's structural. So the structure of a yarn, when we get together, it's not driven by rivalrous dynamics. So let's just look at, so the incentive system, the incentive structure of a yarn is about increasing relatedness. So when we come together and we're talking, it's not really about the ideas, it's about strengthening relationships with us, but then also with all of the entities, human and non-human, and the places, where we've been in all the stories that we're telling. Now, I might have a story about the Southern Cross being a woman's hair if I'm from over west, but then this fellow from over here, down south, he might go, no, that's a canoe. The Milky Way is a canoe, and someone might say the Milky Way is a woman's hair. Those two fellows can sit down and share their stories together, and neither of them has to be right. Neither of them has to have their particular story come out on top, because the idea of bringing the stories together was to bring them alongside each other and have dialogue and see what can come out. That mixing of fresh water and salt water, that high ground, low ground, red soil, black soil, wet and dry, cold and warm. Anybody who does permaculture will know about edge, and it's the sweet spot in between those things. It's where all the magic happens. That's where you find that, amazing, natural power laws in the economies of scale that happen in nature, which are a hell of a lot more efficient at scale than the economies of scale that come out of this civilization and the current economic system we have. You got edge. So the structure of that yarn is not competitive dynamics. It's not rivalrous. It is relational. They're relational dynamics, and they're sitting within an economic system of relational credits that works quite well. Until the demand sharing gets out of control and your niece asks you for $500 for the second frickin' time this month. It's like, how many times are you going to lose $500, my niece? You're a liar. You're doing something bad. I know. I got my eye on you. Anyway. So, but then that's the multipolar trap. That's not her fault. She learned that at school. They teach the Tragedy of the Commons 101 in like year 4 at her school. They teach them how to do it, just to subvert our economy.
Excellent. Tyson, you're going to have to keep the answer to this one pretty short, because we've only got a couple of minutes before we'll need to start to wrap up. But
Sweet.
This question was from George on YouTube, and I think it was in the context of when you were talking about COVID earlier on. He's asking how crises like this one can be studied and corrected using systems thinking. He says it seems like a very practical approach is needed in a very urgent way.
Yeah. But I guess you need hearts and minds to get there. I think most people looking at it, if you're going, all right, well, if it has to be lockdowns, if that's how you're going to deal with it, and all the rest of the public health ways, if it's going to be public health, it has to be everybody and all at the same time. So it would have to be everyone on the planet at the same time for a couple of months, locking down and all the rest. We'd have to all do it at the same time, because otherwise, what are we doing? Where is this going? If there's anybody who has any idea of systems out there, you've got to look at this and go, yeah, this is forever, unless of that. Some people go, oh, look at this country, they did really well, they locked down really quick and locked down really fast, they did really well. Yeah, but for how long? Unless they're going to isolate themselves from the rest of the world forever, everyone has to do it at the same time, or not at all, or we're going to have to start looking at it in a different way. Maybe we should do a discourse analysis about it. Maybe that'll sort it out.
Tyson. That's been great. I think we've addressed all the questions that we've got time for.
Sweet.
Today. So yeah, apologies if we didn't get to your question, but we very much hope that everybody's enjoyed the talk today. For me, it's been excuse me, absolutely fascinating listening to your stories and the ways in which your Indigenous knowledge and your history and your ancestors' history, how all of that comes together to, for us to be where we are now. And how much of our systems thinking in one way or another is linked to sustainability and our own futures, and how our own actions can shape and guide those futures. So if for everybody who's watching who hasn't read Tyson's book Sandtalk, I mean, I spent a very lovely few hours this weekend in the sun reading the book, and it's definitely worthwhile. So I think I'd just like to take the opportunity to say thank you very much, Tyson, for joining us today. I think we've been joined from people all over the world, and the comments are, I don't know if you can see them or not, but I think a lot of people have really enjoyed what you've had to say. You
never know what you're going to get.
That is very true.
Just all lovely though. Look at that.
And for those who would like to watch it again later, the recording will be available on our STiP at 50 website, and we'll also have our next talk on the 28th of September. So we very much hope that you'll be able to join us for that too. So once again, Tyson, on behalf of everybody watching and the Open University, we'd like to just say thank you very much.
Thanks.